Have you ever driven past a house that made your skin crawl? A place where the shadows seem deeper, the silence more profound? That eerie feeling isn't just in your head. Some places collect memories, emotions, and secrets that linger long after people are gone. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about the Blackwood Victorian on Maple Street and why generations of locals have warned their children to stay away. If you're listening to this in bed, you might want to check that your closet door is firmly shut and your hallway light is on. But don't worry too much. Most people who hear this story survive the night just fine. Most people. If this tale keeps you up tonight, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know which part scared you the most. And if you enjoy falling asleep to the sound of my voice weaving these dark little tales, hit subscribe. There are far more stories waiting in the shadows. Now, let's begin our story. The Blackwood Victorian has stood on the corner of Maple and Chestnut in the small town of Millfield, Pennsylvania, for over 130 years. With its ornate gingerbread trim, steep-pitched roof, and weathered gray clapboard siding, it's a magnificent example of Gothic Revival architecture. And the last place on earth I ever wanted to enter. My name is Emma Parker. I grew up 3 blocks away, in a normal suburban ranch house with vinyl siding and an attached garage. My childhood bedroom window faced west, which meant I could see the very top of the Blackwood Victorian's Widow's Walk if I stood on my bed and pressed my face against the glass. I remember doing this often as a child, watching the weather vane spin wildly on gusty autumn evenings, even when the trees in our yard stood perfectly still. "Why doesn't anyone live there?" I asked my mom once, when I was about 7. She was folding laundry and her hands paused for just a moment. "People have tried," she said finally. "They never stay long." "Why not?" "It's just not a happy house, sweetheart," she resumed folding. "Some places aren't meant to be lived in." That response only deepened the mystery. Throughout elementary school, the Blackwood Victorian grew into our town's collective boogeyman. We shared stories at lunch, tales of families fleeing in the night, of accidents and deaths. Most were clearly exaggerated, but one fact remained consistent. No one stayed in the Blackwood Victorian for long. Property records showed a revolving door of owners, none lasting more than 8 months. Most telling of all, not one of those former owners remained in Millfield after leaving the house. By high school, I'd outgrown my childhood fascination. The spooky old Victorian was just a neighborhood eyesore, its once grand facade deteriorating further with each passing year. The ornate trim now hung at crooked angles. The paint peeled in long, curling strips. The front garden had become a tangled wilderness of brambles. It had been vacant for almost a decade, the "for sale" sign weathered to illegibility. That's why I was surprised when, during my senior year, a moving truck appeared in the driveway one crisp October morning. "Did you see?" my best friend Mia asked, sliding into the seat beside me in homeroom. "Someone actually bought that creepy old dump on Maple." I looked up from my chemistry notes. "No way, who?" "Some professor from the city, Dr. Reynolds or something. He's a historian, writing a book about Victorian architecture in rural Pennsylvania." She raised her eyebrows meaningfully. "And get this, he's actually planning to live there while he researches." I snorted. "Good luck to him. I give it 3 weeks." "I bet he doesn't last through Halloween," Mia countered. We were both wrong. Dr. James Reynolds lasted exactly 5 days. I remember the night it happened. It was a Wednesday in mid-October, one of those perfect fall evenings when the air feels crisp and smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves. My parents were at my brother's basketball game in the next town over, and I was home alone, working on college application essays at the kitchen table. The first sign that something was wrong was a power flicker, just a brief dimming of lights that made me glance up from my laptop. Then came the sound of sirens, growing steadily louder until they were unmistakably on our street. I went to the front window and pulled back the curtain. Red and blue lights strobed across the neighborhood. 2 police cars and an ambulance had stopped in front of the Blackwood Victorian. A small crowd of neighbors had already gathered on the sidewalk, huddled in jackets and robes, watching as paramedics rushed up the front steps with a stretcher. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my hoodie and jogged down the block. Mrs. Abernathy from next door was already there in her bathrobe and slippers, clutching her elderly dachshund. "Poor man," she murmured as I approached. They said he called 911 himself, but he was barely coherent. Something about the walls. Breathing. "Breathing walls?" I echoed. She nodded grimly. "Drugs, most likely, or a mental breakdown. Stress does terrible things to people." But I knew Mrs. Abernathy didn't believe that any more than I did, because at that moment, the paramedics emerged with Dr. Reynolds on a stretcher. Even from a distance, I could see that his hair, which had been dark brown when I'd glimpsed him moving boxes just days earlier, had turned completely white. His eyes were open, darting frantically from side to side, and his lips moved in a continuous stream of words I couldn't hear. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he suddenly went rigid. His back arched off the stretcher, and he screamed, a sound so raw and primal that several people in the crowd stepped back. Then his eyes rolled back, and the paramedics were shouting medical jargon as they slammed the ambulance doors. The crowd dispersed quickly after the ambulance drove away. No one wanted to linger near the Blackwood Victorian as night settled more deeply around us. But I stood there a moment longer, staring up at the dark windows of the 3rd floor. And just before I turned to leave, I could have sworn I saw something move behind the glass of the circular attic window. A pale shape, like a face, watching the street below. That should have been enough to keep me away forever. Any rational person would have given the house a wide berth after witnessing such a disturbing scene. But 3 weeks later, I was standing on its front porch with a flashlight in my trembling hand, about to make the biggest mistake of my life. How did I end up there? It wasn't entirely my fault. The dare had started as a Halloween joke at Mia's party, a stupid challenge fueled by spiked punch and teenage bravado. "I heard they're tearing it down next spring," Tyler said, as our conversation inevitably circled back to the Blackwood Victorian and Dr. Reynolds, who was now reportedly in a psychiatric facility in Philadelphia. The town council finally declared it a safety hazard. "Good riddance," someone muttered. "We should do something," said Damon Walsh, the school's star quarterback known more for courage than common sense. "Like a final goodbye to Millfield's most famous haunted house." "What are you thinking?" Mia asked. "Toilet paper the trees?" Damon shook his head, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "I'm thinking we spend the night. Halloween night." The suggestion was met with nervous laughter and immediate protests. Even at 18, with our childhood fears supposedly behind us, no one was eager to set foot in that house. "Not the whole night," Damon backpedaled. "Just an hour. Midnight to 1 a.m. We go in, we take pictures for evidence, we leave. What could happen in 1 hour?" Exactly what happened to that professor guy," I pointed out. "He was alone," Damon countered. "We'll have safety in numbers. Besides, it was probably just a gas leak or carbon monoxide or something. The place is ancient." After much debate, 5 of us agreed to the dare. Damon, Tyler, Mia, her boyfriend Jason, and me. Why did I say yes? I'd like to claim I was being supportive of my friends, but the truth is, part of me, the part still fascinated by the mystery, wanted to see inside those walls. I wanted to know what had turned Dr. Reynolds' hair white overnight. We agreed to meet at midnight on Halloween. The plan was simple. Enter through the back door, which Tyler assured us would be unlocked as the latch had been broken for years, spend 1 hour inside, and then leave with our bragging rights secured. Looking back, I'm amazed at our naivety, at how casually we approached something that had destroyed lives. We treated it like a game. Halloween night arrived cold and clear, with a waning crescent moon providing just enough light to cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn of the Blackwood Victorian. I told my parents I was sleeping at Mia's after the costume party at school. Mia told her parents she was staying at mine. A classic teenage deception that left us both unaccounted for. I arrived last, having walked the 3 blocks alone, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the midnight quiet. The others were waiting behind the house, dark shapes huddled near the kitchen door. Mia looked pale even in the dim light. Jason kept checking his phone, though I knew for a fact there was no reception near the house, another peculiarity people attributed to old wiring or thick walls, but which suddenly seemed more ominous. "You made it," Damon whispered, sounding genuinely surprised. "Thought you might chicken out." "Not a chance," I lied, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. "Let's get this over with." Tyler approached the back door, giving it a gentle push. It swung inward with a low groan that seemed to echo through the entire house. "See, told you." He shone his flashlight into the kitchen, revealing peeling wallpaper and ancient appliances. A heavy layer of dust covered everything except... I frowned, pointing my own light at the floor. "Look," I whispered, "footprints." Clear tracks in the dust led from the door through the kitchen and into the hallway beyond. Recent footprints that couldn't have been from Dr. Reynolds 3 weeks earlier. The dust would have settled again by now. "Probably just kids," Jason said dismissively. "This place is like an urban explorer's dream." But if other teenagers had been brave enough to enter the Blackwood Victorian recently, I'd never heard them boast about it. And in a town our size, that kind of daring exploit would have been impossible to keep quiet. We moved from the kitchen into what must have once been a grand entrance hall. A sweeping staircase curved up to the 2nd floor, its banister thick with dust except where something, or someone, had recently gripped it. To our right was a formal dining room with an ornate chandelier hanging at a dangerous angle. To the left, a parlor with furniture draped in yellowed sheets, like silent ghosts in the beam of our flashlights. 1 hour, Mia reminded us nervously. "We take a few pictures and get out, right?" "Split up to cover more ground?" Damon suggested. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Have you never seen a horror movie? We stay together." No one argued with that logic. As brave as we'd felt planning this adventure, now that we were actually inside, the house felt wrong. The air was heavy and still, yet somehow charged with a subtle vibration, like standing too close to high-voltage power lines. The silence was absolute, no creaking of old timbers, no scurrying of mice, no distant traffic sounds from town. Just a dense, watching quiet. We decided to explore the 1st floor before venturing upstairs. The parlor yielded nothing of interest except some abandoned books on Victorian architecture, likely belonging to Dr. Reynolds. The dining room contained an elaborate table set for 6, complete with tarnished silver and moth-eaten linen napkins. I wondered how long it had been there, and who had set it. As we entered what appeared to be a study, Tyler's flashlight beam caught something unusual on the fireplace mantel. "Check it out," he said, moving closer. "Photographs." We gathered around, examining the collection of framed images. They were sepia-toned portraits, clearly very old, showing stern-faced men and women in Victorian dress. But the strange thing was, they all look alike, Mia whispered. I mean, not exactly alike, but similar, like they're all related. She was right. Though spanning what looked like several decades of fashion, the subjects all shared the same distinctive features: deep-set eyes, high foreheads, and thin, solemn mouths that didn't quite match their faces, as if the smiles had been drawn on afterward. "Probably the original family," Jason suggested. "The ones who built the place." "The Blackwoods," I murmured, remembering snippets of local history. There was something about them, something not right. Before I could elaborate, a loud thump from upstairs made us all freeze. It was unmistakable, a heavy impact directly above our heads, as if something large had fallen or jumped. "Someone else is here," Jason whispered. "Or something," Tyler added unhelpfully. "It's an old house," Damon said, though his voice had lost its confident edge. "Probably just, settling." We stood in tense silence, waiting for another sound. None came, but the quality of the air seemed to change, becoming even heavier, pressing against my eardrums until they ached. I swallowed hard, trying to clear the pressure. "Maybe we should go," Mia suggested. "We've been here 20 minutes. "That's long enough, right?" Part of me agreed wholeheartedly, but another part, the part still driven by curiosity, rebelled at the idea of leaving without seeing the upstairs, without seeing the attic window where I'd glimpsed that pale face the night Dr. Reynolds was taken away. "Let's at least check out the second floor," I found myself saying. "Just a quick look, then we go." Reluctantly, the others agreed. We approached the grand staircase, our flashlight beams dancing nervously over the worn carpet runner. Tyler went first, testing each step before putting his full weight on it. The stairs creaked but held firm. One by one, we ascended into the deeper darkness of the upper level. The second floor landing opened onto a long hallway with doors on either side, bedrooms, presumably. At the far end, another narrower staircase led up to what must be the attic. The dust was thicker here, undisturbed except for those same mysterious footprints, which seemed to wander from room to room before heading toward the attic stairs. "Let's make this quick," Damon muttered, pushing open the first door on the right. It was a bedroom, with an ancient four-poster bed still made up with faded linens. A dressing table stood against one wall, its mirror cloudy with age, but somehow still reflective enough that when our flashlights hit it, the light bounced back with startling intensity. And that's when I noticed something odd about our reflections. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but there was a sixth shape at the edge of the mirror, partially cut off. A figure standing just behind Jason, visible only as a dark silhouette with what looked like a pale oval where the face should be. I gasped and spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the empty air behind us. There was no one there. Yet, when I looked back at the mirror, that sixth figure remained, now seeming to turn its head slightly toward me. "Guys," I whispered, my voice shaking, "look at the mirror. Do you see?" But before I could finish, every flashlight we carried flickered simultaneously and went dark, plunging us into absolute blackness. Panic erupted immediately. Mia screamed. Someone, I think it was Tyler, crashed into furniture. Damon was swearing, slapping his flashlight against his palm. "Stay calm," I shouted over the chaos. "Everyone stay where you are." Surprisingly, they listened. The room fell silent except for our panicked breathing. I fumbled with my own flashlight, but the switch was completely dead. It wasn't just that the batteries had failed. The plastic felt cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been stored in a freezer. "Phone lights," Jason suggested, his voice tight with fear. We all reached for our phones, but mine wouldn't turn on. From the frustrated sounds around me, I gathered no one else was having better luck. "This is impossible," Damon muttered. "Brand new batteries, fully charged phones." A soft scratching sound drew our attention to the hallway, light at first, then more insistent. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly across the wooden floorboards, moving closer to the bedroom doorway. "What is that?" Mia whispered. No one answered. We were all straining to see in the darkness, but it was absolute. The kind of darkness you never experience in the modern world, where streetlights and device chargers and digital clocks always provide some ambient glow. This was a darkness that felt alive, that seemed to press against my eyeballs and seep into my lungs with each shallow breath. The scratching stopped directly outside the bedroom door. Then came a new sound, a wet, labored breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. And suddenly, I understood why we'd been feeling that strange pressure in our ears since entering the house. The walls weren't just walls. The house itself was breathing. "We need to get out," I said quietly. "Now." "But we can't see anything," Tyler hissed. "Hold hands," I ordered. "Form a chain. I'm closest to the door. I'll lead." Fumbling in the darkness, we managed to link hands. I inched toward where I remembered the door being. My free hand extended in front of me. My fingers touched the wooden door frame, then the open space beyond. The breathing sound had stopped, but the air in the hallway felt different, disturbed, as if something had just moved through it. "This way," I whispered, tugging the human chain behind me. "Stay close to the wall." We shuffled forward, one painfully slow step at a time. I kept my shoulder brushing against the hallway wall, counting doorways as we passed. 3 doors on the right, then the landing should be just ahead. But as we walked, something felt wrong. We'd been moving too long, passing too many doorways. The hallway seemed to be stretching, extending beyond its physical dimensions. Panic bubbled in my chest as I realized we should have reached the stairs already. "Emma," Mia's voice trembled behind me. "I think someone's following us." I didn't want to stop, but I forced myself to pause, listening intently. At first, I heard nothing beyond our breathing. Then, soft footsteps, slightly out of sync with our own, as if someone was carefully matching their pace to ours, but occasionally missing the rhythm. "Keep moving," I urged. "We're almost there." It was a lie. I had no idea where we were anymore. The hallway had become a nightmare maze, and with each step, the temperature seemed to drop further. My breath was now visible in front of my face, a small cloud of vapor that momentarily caught what little light existed in this impossible darkness. Wait, light? Where was light coming from? I squinted, realizing there was indeed a faint glow ahead. Not the warm yellow of our flashlights, but a cold, bluish illumination that seemed to pulse gently, like a heartbeat. "I see light," I whispered, "just ahead." "Thank God," Jason muttered. My hand is cramping from holding onto Tyler so tight, but Tyler's confused voice came from directly behind me. "What are you talking about? I'm behind Emma." A chill that had nothing to do with the freezing air shot down my spine. "Then who's holding your hand, Jason?" The silence that followed was broken by Jason's terrified scream. He yanked his hand away from whatever had been gripping it, breaking our chain. I heard a thud as he hit the floor, followed by the sound of him scrambling backwards. "Something grabbed me," he shouted. "Something cold. Oh God, its skin was like ice." "Run!" Damon yelled. "Everyone run!" The fragile order we'd maintained dissolved instantly. I heard my friends bolting in different directions, their footsteps thundering on the wooden floors. But I remained frozen, staring at the pale blue light that was growing stronger, illuminating the hallway in an eerie glow. The light was coming from the end of the corridor, spilling from beneath the door that I now realized must lead to the attic. As I watched, unable to move, unable even to breathe, the door began to open, hinges screaming in protest. Behind it stood a figure. I couldn't make out details in the strange blue light, but it was human-shaped, tall and thin, with limbs that seemed slightly too long for its body. Its face was lost in shadow, but I had the distinct impression it was smiling at me. My paralysis broke. I turned and ran blindly down the hallway, no longer caring about finding the stairs, just desperate to get away from that smiling figure. I slammed into walls, bounced off door frames, my hands outstretched in the darkness. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps, unhurried but steadily closing the distance between us. And then, miraculously, my foot found empty air where the floor should have been. The staircase. I grabbed the banister, nearly tumbling headfirst down the steps in my haste. I took the stairs 3 at a time, praying I wouldn't miss a step and break my neck. As I reached the bottom, a hand seized my wrist. I screamed, twisting violently to break free. "Emma! It's me!" Mia's voice high with panic. My eyes were beginning to adjust to the minimal light coming through the windows from the street lamps outside. I could just make out Mia's face pale with terror. Behind her stood Damon and Tyler, both looking equally shaken. "Where's Jason?" I gasped. "We thought he was with you," Tyler said. "He ran upstairs when we all split up." Upstairs, toward the attic, toward whatever had been smiling in that cold blue light. "We have to find him," I said, though every cell in my body was screaming at me to get out of the house immediately. "Are you crazy?" Damon hissed. "We need to get out now. Jason's smart, he'll find his own way." But even as he spoke, a blood-curdling scream echoed from above us. Jason's voice, distorted by absolute terror, abruptly cut short. And in the silence that followed, we heard heavy footsteps crossing the ceiling, moving deliberately toward the stairs. "Run!" I whispered. "Run!" We bolted for the back door, crashing through the kitchen without care for the noise we made. Tyler reached the door first, yanking it open, only to find it led not to the outside, but to a brick wall, solid and unmistakably real. He slammed his fist against it in disbelief. "This is impossible," he choked out. "This was the way we came in." "Try another door," Damon shouted, already sprinting toward the front of the house. We followed, desperate for escape. Behind us, the heavy footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs and were now moving steadily through the entrance hall. The front door loomed ahead, its ornate, stained glass panels dark against the night beyond. Damon grabbed the knob, twisted, and the door swung open onto the porch and the blessed normalcy of Maple Street beyond. We burst outside, gasping the fresh night air like drowning victims breaking the surface. "Keep running," I managed between breaths. "Don't stop." We sprinted across the overgrown lawn, through the rusted gate and onto the sidewalk. Only when we'd put a full block between ourselves and the Blackwood Victorian did we slow, collapsing onto someone's neatly trimmed front lawn. "Jason," Mia sobbed, clutching her knees to her chest. "We left Jason in there." "We have to call the police," I said, pulling out my phone. To my surprise, it powered on instantly, showing a full battery. Tell them. But what could we tell them? That a house had changed its internal architecture? That we'd been chased by a smiling figure in blue light? That the walls themselves had been breathing? I dialed 911 anyway, reporting that our friend was missing, possibly injured, in the abandoned house on Maple Street. The dispatcher assured me officers would be there within minutes. True to their word, 2 police cruisers arrived at the Blackwood Victorian less than 5 minutes later. We watched from our safe distance as officers approached the house with flashlights drawn. They entered through the front door, the same door we'd escaped through. 20 minutes later, they emerged alone. "They didn't find him," Damon said flatly, as the officers got back in their cruisers without any sense of urgency. "They didn't find anything." A female officer approached us, her expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "We've searched the entire house," she informed us. "All 3 floors, including the attic. There's no one inside." "But that's impossible," Mia protested. "We heard him scream." The officer's face softened slightly. "Look, I understand you kids are upset, but breaking into vacant buildings on Halloween? It's dangerous and it's trespassing. The floor could have given way or—" "You don't understand," I interrupted. "Something's in that house. Something took our friend." She studied my face for a long moment. "Have you kids been drinking or taking anything else?" "No," we all protested simultaneously. She sighed. "I'm going to call your parents to come pick you up. We'll take a missing persons report for your friend if he doesn't turn up by morning. But between you and me," she lowered her voice, "he's probably just playing a prank on you all. Jumped out a window when he heard you running and now he's laughing somewhere." But Jason wasn't playing a prank. He didn't come home that night, or the next day, or ever. The official report eventually listed him as a runaway, despite his parents' insistence that he had no reason to leave. His car remained in the garage. His wallet and ID were still in his bedroom. None of his clothes were missing. His college acceptance letter sat unopened on his desk. The three of us told the truth at first, about the breathing walls, the impossible hallway, the figure in the blue light. But no one believed us. Eventually, Damon and Tyler changed their stories, claiming we'd hallucinated the entire experience. It was easier than living with the ridicule, the pitying glances, the whispered comments about trauma-induced delusions. But I know what I saw, and I know that the Blackwood Victorian took Jason that night, just as it had taken others before. In the months that followed, I became obsessed with the history of the house, spending countless hours in the town library, combing through old newspapers and property records. Edward Blackwood, who built the Victorian in 1885, was notorious, a reclusive figure who rarely left the house in his later years. What struck me most was a pattern. Every few decades, someone associated with the house would vanish without explanation. A maid in 1902, the youngest Blackwood son in 1927, a contractor in 1956. Always without a trace, always written off as runaways or victims of unidentified perpetrators. After each disappearance, the house would remain vacant for years, as if digesting its meal, before another unsuspecting family would be lured by its bargain price. The last Blackwood died in 1963, and the house passed through various owners, none lasting more than a year. Dr. Reynolds had been the most recent, and I found myself wondering what had become of him after that night. His white hair, his frantic eyes, his mention of breathing walls. He had experienced what we had, but somehow escaped. Maybe he knew something that could help me understand. Maybe he had answers. It took some detective work and a convincing lie about being his niece, but I eventually located Dr. Reynolds at a private care facility just outside Philadelphia. By then, 6 months had passed since Halloween night. Graduation was approaching, and I had accepted an offer from a college in California, as far from Millfield and its Victorian nightmare as I could manage. But before I left, I needed answers. The facility was pleasant enough, more like a retreat than a hospital, with manicured grounds and comfortable visiting areas. Dr. Reynolds had a private room overlooking a small garden. When I entered, he was sitting by the window, staring at nothing in particular. The change in him was shocking. The vital, middle-aged academic I'd glimpsed moving into the Blackwood Victorian had become a frail old man, his once dark hair now completely white, his face deeply lined. But most disturbing were his eyes, distant, unfocused, as if seeing things beyond the physical world. "Dr. Reynolds?" I said softly. "My name is Emma Parker. I was in the house, too." His head turned slowly toward me, but his gaze remained unfixed. "House," he repeated, his voice a dry whisper. "House breathes. House remembers." A chill ran through me. "The Blackwood Victorian," I confirmed. "I need to know what happened to you there, what you saw." For a long moment he said nothing, and I feared he was too far gone to communicate coherently. Then his eyes suddenly focused, sharp and present, locking onto mine with startling intensity. "It's still there, isn't it?" he asked, his voice stronger. "They haven't torn it down yet." I shook my head. "No, there was talk about it, but funding issues or something. It's still standing." He nodded, as if this confirmed a private theory. "It won't let them destroy it. It's too strong now, too hungry." "What is it?" I asked, leaning closer. "What's in that house?" Dr. Reynolds glanced around nervously, then gestured for me to come nearer. When I did, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me down until his lips were near my ear. "Not in the house," he whispered urgently. "It is the house. Every brick, every board, every nail. Edward Blackwood didn't just build a home, he built a vessel. A vessel for what? For himself." Reynolds released my wrist, sinking back into his chair. "I found his journals in the attic. The man was obsessed with immortality, with transcending physical death. He studied all manner of dark practices, things forbidden by conventional religion and science alike. He believed he could bind his consciousness to the physical structure of the house, ensuring he would never truly die. That's not possible," I stammered. A bitter smile twisted Reynolds's lips. "Isn't it? What did you experience in that house, Emma Parker? Did it behave like ordinary wood and plaster? Or did it feel alive? Aware? Hungry?" I couldn't answer. The memories of that night, the breathing walls, the extending hallway, the cold blue light, flooded back with sickening clarity. "Blackwood succeeded," Reynolds continued, his voice taking on a lecturer's cadence, as if some part of the professor he once was had momentarily resurfaced. "But the process required fuel, sustenance, the spiritual energy of others." "You mean people?" I whispered, "like the missing maid, the Blackwood son, like Jason." He nodded grimly. "The house, Blackwood, needs to consume life to maintain its own unlife. Some it merely tastes like you and me, taking just enough to leave us diminished but still functioning. Others it devours completely." "Why didn't it take me?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months finally finding voice. "Why Jason, and not the rest of us?" Reynolds shrugged helplessly. "Perhaps you weren't what it wanted. Perhaps it wasn't hungry enough for all of you. Or perhaps—" His voice dropped even lower. "Perhaps." Story number 2. Have you ever felt that strange sensation? That prickling on the back of your neck when you're alone in the snow? That feeling that something is watching you from between the trees? The footprints that appear behind you when you were certain you were alone? I used to think it was just my imagination, until I learned why the Wendigo follows you in the snow. If you're listening to this while tucked in bed, you might want to check that your windows are locked. Not that it would help, because once the Wendigo has your scent, it never stops hunting. My story isn't for the faint of heart. But if you're brave enough to continue, you might just learn how to survive if you ever encounter one yourself. Make sure to listen all the way through. Your life may depend on it. The story begins now. I grew up in northern Minnesota, where winter isn't just a season, it's a state of being. For 6 months of the year, our world transforms into a silent, white wasteland. Beautiful, yes, but deadly if you don't respect it. My name is Alex Larson. I work as a park ranger at Boundary Waters Wilderness Reserve. The locals call me the Snow Whisperer because I've rescued more lost hikers and campers than anyone else in the county. Last January brought the worst blizzard we'd seen in decades, the kind where the snowdrifts swallow cars whole and the wind screams like a wounded animal. Most folks were smart enough to stay indoors, but then I got the call about a missing teenager. Jason Miller, the mayor's son. He went ice fishing this morning. Mayor Miller's voice trembled on the phone. Said he'd be back by noon. It's almost 7 now, Alex. I glanced out my window at the wall of white. Visibility was maybe 10 feet, temperature had dropped to -20, and with the wind chill, it was closer to -40. I'll find him, I promised, though my gut was already nodding with dread. 20 minutes later, I was on my snowmobile, cutting through the forest toward Lake Namakan, where Jason liked to fish. The snow pelted my face shield like tiny bullets, and the trees around me were just dark smudges in the whiteout conditions. When I reached the lake, I found his ice auger. Abandoned. Next to it, a thermos of coffee, still warm to the touch. He'd left in a hurry. But why? That's when I saw them. Footprints in the snow, leading away from the fishing hole. But they weren't Jason's boot prints. These were different. Elongated. Almost like a human's, but with too many toes. And they were huge, nearly twice the size of my own boots. Next to them were smaller prints, running prints that had to be Jason's. Something had scared him. Something had chased him. I followed the tracks, moving as fast as I could through the knee-deep snow. My radio crackled with static as I tried to call for backup, but the storm was blocking the signal. The tracks led into the dense pine forest that bordered the eastern edge of the lake. Away from town, away from safety. As I entered the tree line, I noticed something unsettling. The strange, elongated footprints were getting longer with each stride, as if whatever made them was growing as it ran. I pushed deeper into the woods, calling Jason's name every few minutes. No response, except for the moaning of the wind through the branches. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A low, rattling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the rifle strapped to my back. I swept my headlamp in a wide arc, searching the darkness between the trees. For a split second, I caught a glimpse of something tall and thin, moving with unnatural speed behind a cluster of pines about 50 yards ahead. Too tall to be human. Too thin to be alive in this cold. My heart was pounding now. 20 years in these woods, and I'd never seen anything move like that. Another 100 yards, and I found his fishing tackle box. Spilled open, lures and hooks scattered across the snow. That's when I saw the blood. Dark droplets speckling the pristine white snow. The other tracks, they were changing. The elongated footprints were now accompanied by marks in the snow, as if the creature was occasionally dropping to all fours. Its fingers, impossibly long fingers, leaving deep gouges in the snow. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged clouds. That's when I heard the scream. High-pitched and desperate, unmistakably human. "Jason!" I shouted, breaking into a run, no longer caring about the noise I was making. I burst into a small clearing and swept my light across the scene. There was Jason's bright blue jacket lying in the center of the clearing. But no Jason. As I approached, I realized the jacket wasn't just lying there. It had been placed, arranged carefully on the snow, arms spread wide like a gruesome welcome. The jacket was torn at the shoulder, the fabric stiff with frozen blood. But the amount wasn't consistent with a fatal injury. Jason could still be alive. That's when I heard the whisper. "Don't look up." The voice was so faint I almost missed it. Despite the warning, or perhaps because of it, I slowly raised my eyes. There, in the branches above, was nothing. Just snow-laden pine boughs swaying in the wind. But when I lowered my gaze, I noticed something I'd missed before. A symbol drawn in the snow beside the jacket. A crude stick figure with elongated limbs and antlers sprouting from its head. I'd seen this symbol before, in the old books my Ojibwe grandmother kept. A warning sign, a ward against the Wendigo. As if triggered by my recognition, a howl cut through the night. A sound so full of hunger and hatred that it froze me in place. Not animal, not human, but something in between. I grabbed Jason's jacket and backed toward the tree line, scanning the darkness. That's when my light caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at me from between the trees, 15 feet off the ground. What happened next is still a blur in my memory. Something lunged from the darkness. A skeletal figure, impossibly tall, with skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Antlers sprouted from its skull. And its mouth. God, its mouth was full of jagged teeth that seemed too numerous to fit inside a jaw that unhinged like a snake's. I fired twice, the shots echoing through the forest. The creature screeched, a sound like metal tearing, and disappeared back into the darkness. I ran, faster than I'd ever run before, following my own tracks back toward the lake, toward my snowmobile, toward safety. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush. The clicking sounds growing louder, more frantic. I burst from the tree line onto the frozen lake, my lungs burning with each breath of frigid air. My snowmobile was just ahead, a dark shape against the white expanse. As I reached the machine, a strange silence fell. I turned slowly, rifle raised. The shoreline was empty. Nothing moved in the wall of trees I'd just fled from. With shaking hands, I started the snowmobile and roared away from that place, back toward town, back toward help that could find Jason. But as I glanced over my shoulder one last time, I saw it, standing at the edge of the lake, a tall, emaciated silhouette watching me go. And somehow, I knew it was smiling. The search for Jason Miller became the largest in county history. 50 volunteers, search dogs, even a helicopter once the storm cleared. But we found nothing. No body, no further traces of blood, nothing except those strange, elongated footprints that seemed to appear and disappear at random throughout the forest. 3 days after the disappearance, the search was officially suspended. Unofficially, most people believed Jason had fallen through thin ice and drowned, but I knew better. I'd seen what took him, and it wasn't finished. The dream started a week later, always the same. I'm standing in that clearing again, looking at Jason's empty jacket. But this time, when I look up, I see him, suspended in the branches, his body contorted at impossible angles, his eyes wide with terror. And beside him, the creature, its skeletal fingers stroking Jason's hair almost tenderly as it whispers in his ear. "Tell him," the dream Jason would say, his voice a dry rasp. "Tell him I'm still alive. Tell him I'm still waiting." I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the words echoing in my mind. Tell who? Waiting where? It started with footprints in the snow outside my cabin. Those same elongated tracks with too many toes. They would appear overnight, circling my home, sometimes coming right up to my bedroom window. Next came the sounds. Scratching at my door in the dead of night. That same clicking noise I'd heard in the forest. Once, I even heard Jason's voice calling my name from the darkness beyond my porch. By February, I was barely sleeping. I began researching. I drove to the reservation library and pulled every book they had on Ojibwe legends, particularly those about the Wendigo. What I learned chilled me more than the winter air. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster. It was a spirit of starvation and winter, an embodiment of hunger that can never be satisfied. According to the old stories, it was once human, a hunter who, trapped by winter storms and facing starvation, resorted to cannibalism. That first taste of human flesh transformed him, cursed him with an eternal, insatiable hunger. But why was it fixated on me? I hadn't eaten anyone. I was just trying to save Jason. The answer came from Mrs. Little Bear, the elderly librarian who found me asleep among the books one evening. The Wendigo doesn't just hunt for food, she explained, her weathered face solemn in the library's dim light. It hunts for companions, for transformation. Once it marks someone, it follows them, watches them, waits for them to weaken, to give in to despair or hunger or cold. Then it whispers to them, tempts them to become like it. "How do I stop it?" I asked. Her eyes darkened. "You don't. You either outrun it until spring or you join it." That night, as I drove home through a fresh snowfall, I noticed something disturbing. A single set of tracks running parallel to the road, keeping pace with my truck. Not on the road itself, but just inside the tree line. Those same elongated footprints. And it was following me. When I pulled into my driveway, the tracks continued past my cabin, deeper into the forest. Without thinking, I grabbed my flashlight and followed them. The tracks led to a small frozen pond about a quarter-mile from my property. There, in the center of the ice, was Jason's fishing gear. The same auger and tackle box I'd found scattered in the forest that night. As I approached, the ice creaked beneath my feet. A warning, but I kept going. That's when I heard it. The sound of drilling coming from beneath the ice. The unmistakable whir of an ice auger. I swept my light across the frozen surface and saw a dark shape moving below. Something large, something that shouldn't be there. The ice began to crack. Fine lines spreading outward from where I stood. I backed away slowly, heart hammering in my chest. Then my light caught something at the edge of the pond. A figure standing motionless among the trees, tall and gaunt, with antlers solemn, silhouetted against the night sky. It raised one skeletal hand and beckoned to me, an almost gentle gesture. "Come here, join us." I ran back to my cabin and locked every door and window. That night, the scratching outside was louder than ever. And now it came from multiple directions, as if several creatures surrounded my home. The next day, I found Mrs. Little Bear's home with the door standing open, snow dusting the entryway. She was nowhere to be found, but on her kitchen table was an old leather-bound book, open to a page about the Wendigo. A phrase was underlined in red ink. "Those who see the Wendigo are already marked for transformation." Below it, in shaky handwriting, "It's not following you, Alex. It's waiting for you to follow it." The weeks that followed brought more disappearances. A trapper, 2 hikers who'd ignored trail closures, a snowmobiler who'd ventured too far from the marked paths. Each time, the same pattern. Elongated footprints, abandoned equipment, no bodies. The town was growing nervous. People were staying indoors after dark. The winter, already harsh, seemed to tighten its grip, bringing storm after relentless storm. Then the developers arrived. Northwood's luxury retreats, with their sleek SUVs and glossy renderings of what they called an exclusive wilderness experience. 100 high-end cabins scattered along the lakeshore, right on the Wendigo's hunting grounds. "That land isn't suitable for development," I warned at the town council meeting. "The terrain is unstable, the winter conditions extreme." But the promise of jobs and tax revenue won out. The vote was 6-1 in favor of the project. The lead developer, a sleek, silver-haired man named Cavendish, approached me after the meeting. "Mr. Larson, I'd love to have the legendary Snow Whisperer on board as a consultant. Your knowledge of the area would be invaluable." I ignored his hand. "You have no idea what you're walking into. Is that a threat, Mr. Larson?" "No," I said quietly. "It's a warning. There are things in those woods that don't want you there." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Well, fortunately, we don't need permission from the local wildlife." That night, the first real snow of the season fell. As I stood on my porch watching the flakes drift down, I felt it. A change in the air, a presence. At the edge of my property stood the ancient Wendigo, a creature older and larger than the others, its antlers more elaborately branched, its eye sockets deep and empty yet somehow aware. "I tried to stop them," I said softly. "They won't listen." The creature remained motionless, then raised one skeletal hand and pointed towards town. The message was clear. If I couldn't stop the developers, the Wendigo would. The first accident happened 3 days later. A survey team ventured into the proposed development area. Only 2 of the 5 members returned, their eyes wide with terror. It was tall. So tall, it moved wrong, like its joints were backward. We discovered the first body hanging from a pine tree 15 feet off the ground. The man's neck broken, his body arranged in that same spread eagle position I'd seen with Jason's jacket. The second body was half submerged in the frozen mud of a small pond. The third man was never found. Construction began despite the deaths. That night, the temperature plummeted to record lows. By morning, every piece of heavy equipment at the construction site had been sabotaged. And all around the site, those stick-figure symbols drawn in the snow. Hundreds of them, all facing inward. Cavendish was furious. He hired 24-hour security, installed floodlights and motion sensors, and had construction resume within days. Then came the blizzard, the worst November storm in living memory. 3 feet of snow in 24 hours, with winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. The town was effectively cut off, and that's when they came. Reports filtered in from all over the county. Strange figures seen moving through the blinding snow. Skeletal shapes with antlers. walking upright like men but moving with impossible speed. When the roads finally cleared enough for the sheriff and me to reach the construction site, we found carnage. The security guards were gone, jackets abandoned in their warming hut. The construction trailers had been torn open like tin cans, and the bones, human bones, picked clean and arranged in precise patterns across the site. Some formed those same stick figure symbols I'd seen before. Others were shaped into something more complex, a model of the forest and lake with tiny bone cabins placed exactly where the development was planned. Cavendish arrived the next day with a team of private security contractors, ex-military types with assault rifles. He took one look at the site and vomited in the snow. "What the hell is happening here, Larson?" he demanded. "I told you, there are things in these woods that don't want you here." "Things? What things?" His voice rose hysterically. "Bears don't do this. Wolves don't do this. What the hell are we dealing with?" I met his gaze steadily. "Wendigo." He stared at me blankly, then let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Wendigo? Indian folklore? Ghost stories to scare children?" He gestured wildly at the bone diorama. "You expect me to believe that? That monsters did this?" One of his security contractors spoke up. "Sir, I've seen some strange things in these northern forests. The locals have stories for a reason." Cavendish rounded on him. "I don't pay you for superstition. I pay you to secure this site." The man's expression hardened. "With all due respect, sir, my team and I don't sign up for whatever this is." They turned and headed back to their vehicles. Left with just his personal assistant, Cavendish turned back to me, his face flushed with rage and fear. "This is your doing, isn't it, Larson? You and some local thugs trying to scare me off? I wish it were that simple. But you've awakened something ancient, something territorial." I gestured to the forest surrounding us. "This isn't just land to be bought and sold. It's alive in ways you can't understand." "The project continues," he snapped. "I'm bringing in more security, more workers. We break ground again tomorrow morning." As he stormed back to his Range Rover, I called after him. "They'll come for you next, Cavendish. When the snow falls, they'll come for you." That night brought another snowstorm. I sat on my porch, nursing a glass of whiskey, watching the flakes dance in the glow of my security light. My phone rang shortly after midnight. Sheriff Thompson's voice was tight with panic. "Alex, you need to get to the Mountain View Motel. Now." I arrived to find the motel parking lot filled with the police cruisers, their lights painting the falling snow in alternating red and blue. The hallway outside Cavendish's suite was crowded with deputies, all looking distinctly uncomfortable. One young officer was vomiting into a potted plant. The luxury suite had been transformed into a slaughterhouse. Blood painted the walls in long, arcing sprays. The furniture was overturned, much of it splintered as if smashed by tremendous force. And Cavendish. What remained of him was arranged on the king-sized bed, arms and legs spread wide. But his chest had been split open, his ribcage pried apart. His heart was missing. Most disturbing of all were the windows. The suite was on the 4th floor, at least 40 feet off the ground. Yet clearly visible in the fresh snow on the narrow ledge outside were those familiar elongated footprints. Something had climbed up the sheer face of the building, forced the window, and taken Cavendish. "What are we dealing with, Alex?" Thompson whispered. His normally stoic face creased with dread. "A predator," I said finally. "One that's defending its territory." "No animal did this," he insisted. I met his gaze. I didn't say it was an animal. Northwood's luxury retreats withdrew their development proposal 2 days later. The official statement cited unforeseen environmental challenges and tragic accidents. Winter settled over our town like a smothering blanket. Tourists canceled their reservations. Locals hurried through necessary errands, avoiding the forest's edge. No one ventured onto the lake. not even the most dedicated ice fishermen. They all felt it now, that prickling awareness of being watched, that instinctive dread that makes the hair on your neck stand up when you're alone in the snow. As for me, I continue my patrols. I warn hikers away from certain areas. I enforce closures during storms. I've become more protective of this wilderness than ever before. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights when the wind howls through the pines, I catch glimpses of them. Tall, skeletal silhouettes moving between the trees. Sometimes I think I recognize a particular gait, a certain tilt of antlered head, Mrs. Little Bear's hunched shoulders, Jason's lanky teenage frame, now stretched and twisted into something inhuman. They no longer hide from me. We have an understanding now, the Wendigo and I, a boundary, a covenant. Each winter solstice, I leave an offering at the edge of the lake, a portion of whatever game I've hunted, arranged carefully on a bed of pine boughs. By morning, it's always gone, with nothing but those distinctive tracks in the snow to show it was ever there. In return, they stay in the deep wilderness, hunting only those who disrespect the land or venture too far from safety after being warned. So, now you know why the Wendigo follows you in the snow. It's not just hunting, it's watching, judging, deciding whether you deserve to return to the warmth of hearth and home, or whether you've trespassed too far into its domain. The Wendigo follows to remind us that we are not the apex predator in these northern woods, that there are older, hungrier things that have claimed this wilderness long before us. It follows because winter demands respect, because nature demands balance, because some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. So, the next time you feel that prickling on the back of your neck as you trudge through fresh powder, the next time you think you see something tall and thin moving between distant trees, the next time you notice tracks in the snow that seem to appear from nowhere and follow alongside your own, remember my warning. Turn back, head home, respect the boundary, because if you don't, if you ventured too deep into their territory, you might find yourself becoming what you fear, another hungry shadow in the endless white, another Wendigo following travelers in the snow. Now, before you drift off to sleep, tucked safely in your warm bed, I have one last confession. Sometimes, in the deepest part of winter, when the cold seeps into my bones and the hunger gnaws at my stomach, I feel a change coming over me. My fingers seem longer. My reflection shows a face that's a little too gaunt, eyes that reflect light a little too well. The Wendigo didn't just make me their messenger, they marked me. The transformation is slow, subtle, but inevitable. One day, I too will join their silent hunt through the winter forest. So, if you ever find yourself in northern Minnesota, in the Boundary Waters, and you see a park ranger named Alex Larson, look carefully at his eyes. Look at his hands. Ask yourself if his movements seem just a little too fluid, his knowledge of the forest a little too perfect. And if you feel that familiar prickling on the back of your neck, run. Don't look back. Just run. Because I might be hungry, and the Wendigo always follows you in the snow. If you enjoyed this tale of winter horror, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories that will keep you up at night. Share this with a friend who loves the wilderness. They might think twice before venturing out alone in the snow. And leave a comment below telling me about your own strange experiences in the winter woods. I'm always hungry for new stories to tell. Sweet dreams, and remember, when the snow falls, keep looking over your shoulder. You never know what might be following your tracks. Story number 3. Hey there, night owls and thrill seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want to thank you all for being here. If this is your first time listening, you're in for something special tonight. And if you're returning, well, you know the drill. Dim those lights, get comfortable, and prepare for a journey you won't forget. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss these midnight tales. and leave a comment with your own strange experiences. Now, let me tell you about something that happened to me, something I've never shared publicly until now. The story begins. I used to be a skeptic, the kind who'd roll my eyes at ghost stories and change the channel when paranormal shows came on. That was until 3 summers ago, when I took that solo camping trip to Blackwood National Forest in northern Arizona. I still question whether I should tell this story, but keeping it inside has been eating away at me for too long. So here it is, the reason I no longer camp alone. The reason I no longer dismiss the unexplainable. I had just finished my 3rd year teaching high school English in Phoenix. June in Arizona is brutal, and I desperately needed to escape the heat and the noise of the city. I'd been saving up for a kayak, finally bought it, and was eager to test it out on Blackwood Lake. The lake sits in a remote part of the Navajo Nation borderlands that most tourists never visit. Probably for good reason. My best friend Jamie was supposed to join me, but bailed last minute due to a family emergency. "Don't go alone, Mark," she warned. "Those woods get weird after dark." I laughed it off. What could possibly happen in a national forest with ranger stations and marked trails? That confidence, that arrogance. I regret it every day. The drive up was peaceful. Windows down, music playing, the temperature dropping pleasantly as I gained elevation. I arrived at the ranger station around 4 p.m. on a Friday. The elderly park ranger, Bill, seemed surprised to see anyone. "Not many folks come up here these days," he said, stamping my permit. "Especially not alone." He paused, looking at me with weathered eyes that had seen too much. "Stay on the marked trails. Be back before sundown each day, and whatever you hear at night, stay in your tent." I nodded, assuming it was the standard wildlife warning. Bears, mountain lions, the usual suspects. Only later did I realize he never actually mentioned any animals. "One more thing," he added as I turned to leave. "If you see anyone else out there, someone who seems off, don't approach them. Just head straight back here." That should have been my first clue, but I was too excited about having the lake to myself to pay it much mind. I set up camp about a half-mile from the lake's edge, in a small clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines. My sight was beautiful, far enough from the main trail to feel secluded, but not so remote that I couldn't find my way back. The afternoon was spent kayaking on the glassy surface of the lake, watching eagles soar overhead and feeling the stress of the school year melt away. As the sun began its descent, I returned to camp, built a small fire, and cooked the hot dogs I'd brought. The perfect camping meal, simple but satisfying. That first night was uneventful. The stars were incredible, a dazzling carpet of light that city dwellers like me rarely get to see. I fell asleep to the gentle chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the second day when things started to feel different. I woke early, made coffee on my portable stove, and planned a hike to a nearby ridge that Bill had marked on my map. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Perfect hiking weather. I packed my day pack with water, trail mix, a first aid kit, and my camera. The trail started easily enough, well marked and only moderately steep. But about 2 miles in, I noticed something odd. The bird songs that had accompanied me suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums like a physical force. I paused, taking a swig from my water bottle, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. That's when I noticed the tracks. Not quite human, not quite animal. Longer than human footprints, with what looked like elongated toes ending in points. I knelt down for a closer look, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs. Whatever had made these tracks was walking on 2 legs, but they weren't hiking boots, they weren't bear paws either. A branch snapped somewhere to my left and I jerked upright. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Anyone there?" Nothing. Just the wind through the pines and that oppressive silence. I decided to continue. The ridge was only another mile ahead, and I told myself the tracks were probably just a deer with unusual hooves, or maybe a hiker with some kind of specialized trekking shoes. The human mind is remarkably good at rationalizing the unexplainable. The ridge offered spectacular views, the lake shimmering below, mountains rolling to the horizon, the sky a perfect blue canvas. I took several photos, had lunch, and tried to shake the lingering unease. By mid-afternoon, I was heading back down, hoping to get in another kayak session before sunset. That's when I saw it. Or rather, her. At first, about 50 yards ahead on the trail stood a woman. She was facing away from me, wearing what appeared to be a white dress, inappropriate for hiking. Her dark hair hung in a long braid down her back. "Hello there?" I called, relieved to see another person after the strangeness earlier. She didn't respond or turn around. I moved closer. "Excuse me, are you okay? It's getting late to be out here alone." Still nothing. Just as I got within 20 feet, she turned her head, just her head, nearly 180 degrees to look at me. Her face, God, I still see it in my nightmares. It wasn't right. The proportions were all wrong, like someone who had heard about human faces but had never actually seen one. Her eyes were too large, too dark, and completely void of anything I could recognize as human emotion. Her smile stretched literally from ear to ear, filled with teeth that seemed too numerous and too sharp. I froze. Every instinct screamed danger. The ranger's warning echoed in my mind. If you see anyone who seems off. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, in a voice that sounded like several people speaking at once, some high, some impossibly deep, she said, "You're out late, teacher. The sun's going down soon." I hadn't told anyone out here I was a teacher. Before I could respond, she changed. It's hard to describe what happened next. Her body seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. The white dress wasn't a dress at all, but some kind of pale hide or skin. Her limbs elongated, joints bending in impossible directions. And then she dropped to all fours, but not like a human would. More like her bones rearranged themselves. I ran. Blind panic propelled me down that trail faster than I've ever moved in my life. Branches whipped my face, roots tried to trip me, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, I heard something moving through the underbrush, not with the crashing you'd expect from a large animal, but with a terrible efficiency, like it knew exactly how to navigate the forest at high speed. Somehow, I made it back to camp. My lungs felt like they were on fire, and my legs trembled so badly I collapsed beside my tent. I frantically searched for my car keys, planning to abandon everything and drive away. But as I caught my breath and looked around, everything seemed normal. The birds were singing again. The sun was still above the horizon. My campsite looked undisturbed and peaceful. Maybe I had hallucinated the whole thing. Dehydration could cause vivid hallucinations, I reasoned. Or maybe something I ate had triggered some kind of episode. I forced myself to drink water, eat a granola bar, and try to calm down. As twilight descended, I built up my fire as large as safety would allow. I couldn't bring myself to get into the tent. Too confined, too vulnerable. Instead, I sat by the fire, my back against a log, clutching my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other. Every shadow in the woods seemed to move. Every rustle made me flinch. Around midnight, the howling started. It wasn't wolves or coyotes. I know those sounds. This was something else entirely. It started as a low moan, almost human, then rose to a keening wail that made the hair on my arms stand up. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, just beyond the circle of firelight, I saw them. Eyes reflecting the flames. Dozens of pairs surrounding my campsite. some at ground level, some higher up, as if their owners were of varying heights, or as if some were climbing the trees. "Leave me alone," I shouted, waving my knife at the darkness. "I don't want any trouble." A laugh answered me, that same multi-voiced sound I'd heard from the woman on the trail. "But you brought the trouble, teacher. You brought it with you." Something moved just at the edge of the light. A figure that might have been human-shaped if humans could bend that way. It was there, and gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. I didn't sleep, not for a second. I kept the fire going and watched as the eyes appeared and disappeared throughout the night, sometimes drawing closer, sometimes retreating, as if testing my resolve. They never fully entered the circle of firelight. When dawn finally broke, they were gone, and no tracks or evidence remained to prove they had ever been there. I should have left then. Any rational person would have packed up and fled, but some stubborn part of me, some prideful, foolish part, was still trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe local kids playing an elaborate prank? Maybe I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced breakdown. I spent the morning by the lake, the bright sunlight and open space making the night's terrors seem distant and almost laughable. I took my kayak out, paddling hard to burn off the anxious energy. The lake was beautiful, mist rising from its surface, fish jumping occasionally, nature at its most peaceful, until I saw her again, standing on the shore, exactly where I had launched my kayak. Same white dress, same wrong face, watching me. I paddled to the opposite shore, my arms burning with the effort. When I looked back, she was gone. But I knew she hadn't left. She was just waiting. I dragged my kayak up onto the unfamiliar shore, deciding to hike around the lake rather than paddle back to where she had been standing. It was a longer route back to camp, but it felt safer. The forest on this side of the lake was denser, less traveled, with no clear path. I checked my phone for GPS, but of course, there was no signal. As I picked my way through the underbrush, I realized I was following more of those strange tracks, the not-quite-human footprints I'd seen the day before. Only now there were more of them, going in all directions, as if whatever made them had been pacing, searching for something, searching for me. The tracks led to a small clearing, and in the center stood something that stopped me cold. A crude effigy made of sticks and animal bones, bound together with what looked like hair and sinew. It was roughly human-shaped, about 3 feet tall, and tied around its neck was a red ribbon, exactly like the one I used to mark the pages in the novel I'd brought to read in my tent. I hadn't noticed it missing, which meant whatever had taken it had been inside my tent while I was at the lake. I turned to retreat and saw her standing at the edge of the clearing. Only now, I could see her more clearly in the daylight. The white dress was made of something that looked like animal hide, sewn together with crude stitches. Her skin didn't move right when she did. It seemed to shift independently of the muscle and bone beneath. And her feet, they weren't feet at all, but hooves, carefully disguised but visible now that I was looking for them. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hardly more than a whisper. She cocked her head at an impossible angle. "What do all hunters want, teacher? A worthy prey?" She took a step toward me, and I saw others emerging from the trees behind her. Figures that resembled humans, but moved all wrong. Jerky, too fluid, or both somehow. Some walked upright, others prowled on all fours. All had that same wrongness to their faces, features that were almost but not quite human. I ran again, crashing through the forest with no regard for direction, just away from them. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to buckle. When I couldn't run anymore, I climbed a tree, wedging myself in a fork of branches about 15 feet up. From there, I could see the lake. My campsite would be maybe a half-mile through the woods to the east. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthened. No sign of the woman or the others. Just as I had convinced myself it was safe to climb down, I heard something moving below. Not footsteps, but a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. I looked down. At the base of my tree was a deer carcass, freshly killed, its throat torn out. As I watched in horror, a hand, a human-looking hand, emerged from the underbrush and pulled the carcass a little closer to my tree, then another hand. Then I saw the face attached to those hands. Another wrong face, this one resembling an older man, but with those same too large, too dark eyes. He, looked up at me and smiled. "Come down, teacher, share our meal, join our family." I stayed in that tree until sunset, watching as more of them gathered below. They didn't try to climb up after me, they just waited, sometimes speaking to each other in languages I couldn't understand, sometimes going completely still for long periods. They were patient, like they had all the time in the world. As darkness fell, I knew I had to move. My phone was dead, no one knew exactly where I was, and I couldn't stay in the tree indefinitely. When the moon rose, a thin crescent that provided barely any light, I climbed down the opposite side of the tree as quietly as I could. The creatures were still there, but they seemed to be focused on something else, some kind of ritual involving the deer carcass and the stick effigy, which they had somehow brought to this location. I crept away, moving from tree to tree, using every shadow for cover. I had no flashlight. I dropped it during my panic earlier. All I had was my pocket knife and the clothes on my back. Somehow, I found the main trail, and then a miracle. Headlights in the distance. A vehicle on the park road. I ran toward it, waving my arms frantically, screaming for help. It was a ranger truck. Inside was Bill, the elderly ranger from the station. He looked unsurprised to see me, but grim. "Get in," he said, unlocking the passenger door. "Quick now." I didn't need to be told twice. As soon as I was inside, he accelerated, faster than was safe on the narrow park road. "They found you, didn't they?" he asked, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. I nodded, unable to find words. "The Navajo have stories about them going back centuries," he said. "Most folks call them skinwalkers, but that's not quite right. The real name is something I can't pronounce. They were people once, a long time ago. Medicine men and women who wanted power so badly they gave up their humanity for it. Now they hunt. Not just for food, but for recruits." "Recruits," my voice cracked on the word. Bill nodded. "They can't reproduce, not in the usual way. They need to turn others, make them like them. Usually they just kill, but sometimes they find someone they want to add to their family, someone with qualities they value." "Like what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "Intelligence, strength, youth, the ability to teach others." A chill ran through me as I remembered the thing calling me teacher repeatedly. "We need to call the police," I said. "There are more of them back there. They killed a deer. They were doing some kind of ritual." Bill shook his head. "Police won't help. They've been looking for these creatures for decades. Never found a thing. By sunrise, there won't be any evidence they were ever there." As we drove, I kept checking the side mirrors, convinced I would see them following us. But the road behind remained empty. When we reached the ranger station, Bill ushered me inside and locked the door. He made me strong coffee and listened as I told him everything. He didn't question any of it, just nodded occasionally, his face growing more troubled. "You're lucky," he said when I finished. "Most folks they set their sights on don't get away." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you leave. First light, you drive out of here and don't look back. Go home. And then..." "Then what?" He looked at me with those weathered eyes. "Then you decide." "Decide what?" "Whether to forget or to prepare." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This contains herbs the Navajo use for protection. Hang it by your door. It won't stop them, but it'll warn you if they're near. It'll turn black." I took the pouch, not entirely believing in such things, but unwilling to refuse any form of protection after what I'd seen. Do they follow people after they leave here? I asked. Bill was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes. If they've chosen you, really chosen you, distance won't matter much. They're patient. They can wait years. I spent that night on a cot in the ranger station, jumping at every sound. Bill kept watch, a shotgun across his lap, though he admitted it would do little good against them. Best it can do is slow them down, he said. Give you time to run. At first light, I drove away from Blackwood National Forest, the small leather pouch hanging from my rearview mirror. I kept expecting to see that wrong-faced woman standing in the middle of the road, or running alongside my car with that impossible speed, but the drive was uneventful. I returned to Phoenix, to my apartment, to my normal life. For a few weeks I convinced myself it had all been some kind of breakdown, stress from teaching perhaps, or a negative reaction to something in the forest. The leather pouch remained its natural tan color hanging now from my bedpost. Life went on. Then, a month after my return, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to find the pouch had turned black as pitch. My windows were locked. My doors were secure. But somehow, on my kitchen table, I found a single white feather and a small stick figure, crudely made but recognizably human-shaped. I moved the next day. Changed schools. Changed my phone number. Told no one where I was going. But it didn't matter. Every few months, no matter where I go, I find signs they've been there. A strange track in the garden soil. A smell like wet animal fur in my closed garage. That feeling of being watched. They're patient. They're still waiting. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I hear that multi-voiced call from just beyond my bedroom window. Teacher, come join our family. We have so much to show you. I'm telling this story now because I need someone else to know. I need it on record somewhere. If I disappear someday, and I fear I will, at least someone will know why. If you ever find yourself in the remote wilderness and the birds suddenly stop singing, if you see someone whose movements seem just slightly wrong, if you feel eyes on you that you can't locate, don't investigate. Don't try to be brave or rational. Run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because once they choose you, the skinwalkers never truly let you go. So, there you have it. The reason I sleep with the lights on now. The reason I've changed jobs 3 times in as many years. The reason I never go hiking alone. Do I still see signs of them? Yes, more frequently now than ever before. Just last week I found another of those crude stick figures. This time on the hood of my car in a crowded shopping mall parking lot. No cameras caught anyone approaching my vehicle. I've learned more about them since my encounter. Found others who've had similar experiences. We share information, theories, protection methods. Some work better than others. The Navajo herbs help detect them, but I've found that iron and salt seem to keep them at bay, at least temporarily. If you've had an experience like mine, leave a comment below. Maybe together we can figure out how to end this nightmare once and for all. And if you haven't, count yourself lucky. Keep your eyes open, especially in wild places where the boundary between our world and theirs grows thin. Subscribe for more true encounters like this one. Next week, I'll tell you about the abandoned mine in Colorado where I found evidence they might be gathering. Planning something bigger than individual hunts. Until then, stay safe, stay vigilant, and if the birds stop singing around you, run. Story number 4. Have you ever had that feeling of being watched in the woods? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you're all alone in nature? What if I told you that sometimes those feelings are justified? Before we dive into my story today, I want you to think about what you would do if you came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. Something science says is just a myth. Would you run? Would you freeze? Or would you try to document it? Because I thought I knew what I would do too, until it actually happened. If this is your first time here on the channel, the story might just change the way you think about those unexplained sounds you hear while camping. And if you're a regular listener, well, you know, I only share the most bone-chilling encounters. This one kept me awake for weeks. So get comfortable, maybe not too comfortable, and join me as I share what happened to me last fall in the remote wilderness of Olympic National Park. The story is about to begin. I've always been a rational skeptic. As a wildlife photographer from Portland, I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness capturing everything from elusive mountain lions to shy black bears. But nothing in my 15 years of experience prepared me for what I encountered last October in the dense, misty forests of Olympic National Park. The assignment was simple enough. A nature magazine had commissioned me to document the changing colors of autumn in one of America's most pristine, temperate rainforests. I'd been looking forward to 2 weeks of solitude, just me and my cameras. The first 3 days were uneventful, almost magical, actually. The weather held beautifully cool, crisp mornings giving way to mild afternoons, with just enough mist to create that ethereal quality that photographers dream about. It was on the 4th night that things started to feel different. I'd hiked farther than usual that day, following a tip from a park ranger about a hidden valley where the bigleaf maples were especially vibrant. As I prepared my dinner on the small camping stove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. My campsite looked exactly as I'd left it that morning. But something felt off. Then I noticed the silence. If you've spent time in forests, you know they're never truly quiet. There's always a background symphony, insects buzzing, small animals rustling through underbrush, the distant calls of birds. But that night, there was nothing. An absolute stillness that felt heavy, almost pressurized against my eardrums. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling foolish. I was at least 6 miles from the nearest person. No response. Just that unnerving silence. Around midnight, I finally heard it. A crack of a branch breaking somewhere in the darkness. A single, deliberate sound that seemed to punctuate the silence rather than break it. "Just a deer," I whispered to myself. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I'd heard deer moving through forests hundreds of times. They make a particular pattern of sounds. Multiple steps, pauses, more steps. This was different. A single, isolated crack, as if something wanted me to hear it. Just as my breathing began to normalize, it came again. Another crack, closer this time, and then another, from a different direction, and another. Something was circling my camp. I reached for my headlamp with trembling fingers, then unzipped the tent fly in one quick motion and stepped outside, switching on my light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating trees, undergrowth, the darkened shapes of boulders. Nothing unusual. No eyes reflecting back the light. No shadowy figure retreating into the forest. When no further sounds came, I reluctantly returned to my tent, but I didn't sleep. Sometime in the early morning hours, exhaustion finally overtook vigilance, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I awoke to the sound of birds singing. For a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the entire episode. Then I stepped outside. Around my campsite, pressed into the soft earth, was a line of tracks. Not deer, not bear, not human. They were enormous. Easily 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toe impressions. They formed a perfect circle around my tent, as if whatever made them had been pacing all night, watching me sleep. My blood ran cold as I knelt to examine them more closely. These were bipedal tracks, made by something heavy enough to sink deep into the forest floor. They weren't made by something randomly wandering through. They were deliberate, methodical, almost ritualistic in their perfect circle around my tent. The rational part of my brain was desperately trying to find an explanation. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by other hikers. but I hadn't seen anyone for days. And who would hike miles into the wilderness just to scare a random photographer? The explanation I kept circling back to was the one I least wanted to accept. Something had found me in these woods, something that shouldn't exist. I needed to make a decision. The sensible option was to pack up immediately and hike back to civilization. But I still had 10 days of shooting scheduled, and I had a chance to document something that would change science forever. In the end, professional curiosity won out over self-preservation. I decided to stay, but with precautions. My new campsite was about 2 miles from the original location, nestled in a small clearing beside the Ho River. The constant babble of water over rocks was soothing after the unnerving silence of the previous night. I spent the afternoon setting up an elaborate security system, 4 trail cameras positioned to cover all approaches to the camp, each capable of capturing night vision images. I also strung a rudimentary alarm with aluminum cups and utensils around the perimeter. As the sun set and shadows lengthened across the clearing, I found myself staring into the dense wall of trees beyond my campsite. Were those yellow-green eyes blinking back at me, or just the last rays of sunlight reflecting off dewdrops on leaves? I stayed awake as long as I could, feeding the fire, checking and rechecking the trail cameras. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and I retreated to my tent, leaving the fire burning low. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the distinctive sound of my makeshift alarm. The metallic clatter of cups banging together cut through the night, stopping abruptly as if whatever had disturbed them had frozen in place. I sat up, fully alert, knife in hand. The fire outside had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to create a soft glow against the tent walls. And in that glow, I saw it. A massive silhouette, motionless, standing just beyond my tent. The shape was unmistakably humanoid, but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too broad across the shoulders. It stood perfectly still, as if assessing the situation. Watching. Thinking. Then, without warning, my alarm sounded again, from the opposite side of the camp. The silhouette turned suddenly and moved away with surprising grace for something so large. I heard more movement, more sounds of my alarm being triggered in different locations. There wasn't just one of them. There were several. They were coordinating, moving around my camp in what seemed like an organized pattern. Testing my defenses, perhaps. Or hurting me. Through a narrow opening in the tent flap, I pointed my light toward where I'd heard the last sound. The beam caught something moving between trees, just a glimpse of russet-brown fur and a long arm disappearing behind a massive cedar. I swung the light to another sound and saw another fleeting shape, broader, darker, vanishing into the underbrush. They were moving too quickly, staying just at the edge of the light's reach. But there was no denying what I was seeing. These were not bears or any known wildlife. They moved with purpose, with intelligence, and they were working together. The activity outside continued for about 20 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence returned. Had they left? Or were they waiting just beyond the reach of my light, watching for my next move? I must have eventually fallen into an exhausted sleep, because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering through the tent fabric. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent and emerged into the clearing. My campsite looked undisturbed in the morning light. I made my way to the nearest trail camera, heart pounding. If I'd imagined everything, the memory card would show nothing but empty forest. But if not, what I saw made my blood freeze. The night vision image was grainy but unmistakable. A massive figure at the edge of the clearing, at least 7 feet tall. Broad shoulders covered in thick fur. And though its face was partially obscured by foliage, I could make out 2 reflective eyes staring directly at the camera. Intelligent eyes. Aware eyes. eyes that knew exactly what they were looking at. The other cameras had captured similar images, different angles, different figures, all with the same general appearance but varying in size and coloration. The fourth camera had been turned to face the ground, its mounting strap snapped. They had known what the cameras were. They had deliberately avoided full exposure. And one of them had disabled a camera. These weren't animals acting on instinct. These were beings making calculated decisions. I had to make a decision. Pack up and hike out immediately with the evidence I already had? Or stay and try to capture clearer images? As I checked my equipment and prepared for the day's photography, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. Every few minutes I would stop and scan the forest edge, certain I would see a shape watching me from the shadows. Just as I was about to head out for the day's shoot, something caught my eye near the river's edge. There, arranged in a neat row on a flat rock, were 3 pine cones, a brilliant red maple leaf, and what appeared to be a small, intricately woven nest made of grass and twigs. It hadn't been there the evening before, I was certain of it, and it was too deliberately placed to be the work of wind or water. It looked like an offering. I photographed it from every angle before examining each item. It was the nest-like object that truly captured my attention. It was about the size of my palm, woven with remarkable precision. At its center was a small, smooth river stone of unusual coloration, white, with a perfect streak of black running through it like an eye. Was this communication? A gift? A warning? I left everything exactly as I'd found it and backed away, unsure of the proper response. Then, following some instinct I couldn't explain, I took one of my granola bars, unwrapped it, and placed it beside the arrangement. "Thank you," I said aloud, feeling simultaneously foolish and deeply reverent. "I mean no harm. I'm just here to photograph the forest." I waited, half expecting some response from the silent trees. None came. The maple grove was even more spectacular than my editor had described. Hundreds of ancient big-leaf maples draped in emerald moss, their leaves transformed by autumn into cascades of amber, crimson, and gold. But I worked efficiently, mechanically, capturing the necessary shots without my usual creative enjoyment. Every few minutes I would pause and scan my surroundings, searching for any sign of movement among the trees. Several times I was certain I heard soft footfalls moving parallel to my path, keeping pace with me just beyond visual range. Once, I spun around quickly enough to catch a flicker of movement, something large ducking behind a massive cedar trunk about 50 yards away. "I know you're there," I called out, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "I am not afraid of you." That was a lie, of course. I was terrified, but also fascinated, and somehow certain that fear was the wrong response. By mid-afternoon, I had captured all the images I needed for my assignment. The rational choice would have been to return to camp and start hiking towards the trailhead while daylight remained. But something compelled me to continue deeper into the grove, to a small clearing I'd spotted through the trees. The clearing was perfect, a cathedral-like space surrounded by the oldest maples I'd seen yet, their trunks twisted and gnarled with age. The ground was carpeted with fallen leaves, creating a mosaic of autumn colors. At the center stood a massive nurse log. I set up my tripod and began shooting. I was so absorbed that I nearly missed it. A soft rustling behind me, different from the sound of wind through leaves. I froze, fingers still on the shutter button, and slowly turned my head. At the edge of the clearing, partially concealed behind one of the massive maple trunks, stood a figure. Not fully visible, not aggressive, just watching. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to remain calm. Moving with deliberate slowness, I stepped away from my tripod, keeping my hands visible. "Hello," I said softly, as if greeting a shy child. "It's okay, I won't hurt you." The figure shifted slightly, revealing more of itself. It No, she, I somehow knew, was at least 7 feet tall, with a powerful frame covered in russet-brown fur that caught the golden afternoon light. Her face was the most startling feature, more expressive and human-like than I had expected, with deep-set eyes under a prominent brow ridge. Those eyes watched me with unmistakable intelligence and cautious curiosity. We regarded each other across the clearing for what felt like an eternity. I slowly raised my hand in greeting, a simple, open-palmed gesture of peace. To my astonishment, she mimicked the gesture, raising a massive hand that was both familiar and alien. 5 fingers, opposable thumb, but larger, stronger, covered in fur. My photographer's instincts screamed at me to reach for my camera, to document this impossible encounter. But some deeper wisdom held me back. This wasn't a wildlife sighting to be captured and shared. This was a meeting between 2 intelligent beings. "Thank you," I said softly, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking her for. Perhaps for allowing herself to be seen. She made a sound then, a soft vocalization that wasn't quite speech but carried clear intention. A rumbling series of notes that reminded me of distant thunder. Then, with a grace that belied her size, she backed away into the shadows of the forest. Not fleeing, but deliberately withdrawing. One moment she was there, and the next, gone. I reached my campsite as the day's light was fading. The offering by the river was gone, both the items they had left and the granola bar I had added. In their place was a small arrangement of brilliant red berries, forming a perfect circle. As darkness fell, I built a fire again, more for light than warmth. I kept replaying the clearing encounter in my mind, analyzing every detail, every nuance of that brief connection. I ate a simple dinner, my senses hyper-alert to every sound from the surrounding forest. But, unlike previous nights, the sounds didn't feel threatening. As I prepared for sleep, I placed another granola bar and a shiny red apple near the circle of berries. Another offering, another acknowledgement. Inside my tent, I lay awake, listening. Not tense with fear as before, but alert with anticipation. Would they return? Would there be another encounter? I must have drifted to sleep eventually because I awoke suddenly to complete silence. That unnatural, pressurized silence from the first night had returned. And with it, the certainty that something was directly outside my tent. I lay perfectly still, barely breathing. There was no sound, no movement, but the presence was undeniable. A palpable weight in the air. A soft thud against the tent made me freeze again. Something had been placed on the ground just outside the entrance. Minutes passed as I listened intently. Eventually, the sound of retreating footsteps, heavy yet remarkably quiet, faded into the distance. The forest sounds gradually returned. I waited until I was certain whatever had visited was gone, then cautiously unzipped the tent fly. There, placed precisely in front of the entrance, was a small object catching the moonlight. A stone, perfectly oval, polished smooth, with intricate patterns of white and deep blue swirled throughout its surface. It was beautiful, and unmistakably a gift. I cradled it in my palm, wondering at its significance. Was it simply a pretty object they thought might interest me? Or did it carry deeper meaning? "Thank you," I said aloud to the night. "It's beautiful." On impulse, I retrieved my wallet from the tent and removed a small photograph, a personal favorite I'd taken of Mount Rainier at sunrise. I placed it where the stone had been, weighed down with a small rock to prevent it from blowing away. "A picture, an image," I explained, unsure if my words were understood or even heard. "It's what I make, what I give back." Morning arrived with a gentle rain pattering against the tent. I emerged to find my photograph gone. In its place was a freshly picked bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers and ferns, arranged with evident care. The exchange touched something deep within me, the universal language of gifts, of seeing and being seen. They were trying to communicate, to connect across a divide of species and understanding. As I began breaking camp, preparing for the hike back to civilization, I felt an unexpected reluctance. I had come to these woods for photographs of autumn leaves, and had stumbled upon something far more profound. Something caught my eye then. A movement in the underbrush about 30 yards away. Not furtive or threatening, but deliberate, meant to be noticed. A small branch waved back and forth from behind a tree, too rhythmic to be wind, too controlled to be an animal. It was a signal. I raised my hand and waved slowly in the same pattern. The branch stopped moving. Then, gradually, a figure emerged partially from behind the tree, not the russet female from yesterday, but a larger, darker form with silver-tipped fur across massive shoulders. He remained half-concealed, watching me with evident caution. But there was a directness to his gaze that sent a clear message. Follow. Every logical part of my brain screamed that following would be madness. You don't follow unknown creatures into dense forest, far from trails or help. That's how people disappear without a trace. And yet, there had been multiple opportunities for harm if that was their intention. If they had wanted to hurt me, they could have done so many times over. I made a compromise with my fear. I would follow, but not too far. I quickly scribbled on a waterproof notepad. Following large bipedal creature NE from camp, returning shortly, and placed it visibly in my tent. I gathered my emergency essentials and my camera, then stepped toward the waiting figure. We walked for perhaps 20 minutes, moving deeper into old-growth forest where massive cedars and hemlocks created a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Then suddenly he was gone, vanished among the trees ahead. I stopped, turning slowly, scanning the forest. A soft vocalization came from my right. I turned to see her there, the russet-furred being from the maple grove. She stood in a small gap between two ancient cedars, fully visible now, watching me with those intelligent eyes. She gestured with one hand, a surprisingly human motion, beckoning me forward. I followed, and the forest opened into a small clearing unlike any I'd seen before. At its center stood a massive, lightning-struck cedar, its top sheared off decades ago, but its trunk still very much alive. Around this natural monument were arranged stones of various sizes, forming a rough circle. But what took my breath away were the objects placed upon these stones. Dozens of items clearly human in origin, arranged with evident purpose. A child's faded red backpack, a weathered hiking boot. An old film camera, its leather case cracked with age. It was a shrine of sorts, or perhaps a museum, a collection of human artifacts spanning what must have been decades. That's when I saw it, half hidden behind the massive trunk, leaning against one of the larger stones. A tripod. Not just any tripod, but a professional carbon fiber model identical to the one in my own kit. And beside it, a camera bag bearing the logo of a well-known wildlife photography brand. My blood ran cold as realization hit me. I wasn't the first photographer to encounter these beings. Yet there was nothing threatening in the female's demeanor. If anything, she seemed solemn, respectful, as if she were showing me something of great importance. What happened to them, to the people who owned these things? She tilted her head slightly, then made a sweeping gesture with one arm that encompassed the entire clearing. Then she pointed deliberately at my camera, then to my eyes, then outward toward the forest. As if sensing my confusion, she approached one of the stones and gently picked up an object I hadn't noticed before. A small leather-bound journal. She held it out to me, her movements deliberate and careful. I hesitated, then stepped forward to accept it. Our hands briefly touched in the exchange, her massive palm dwarfing mine, the fur surprisingly soft against my skin. The journal's handwriting was tight and precise, dated nearly 30 years ago. The final entry sent a chill through me. They've made contact. Not hostile, but different. Intelligent beyond anything we theorized. They want to show us something tomorrow. Something important deeper in the old growth. I'm leaving this journal and equipment at camp as backup in case. But I don't feel afraid anymore. I feel invited. The journal ended there. No explanation of what they were shown, no record of their return. What happened to them? I asked again, holding up the journal. Are they? The female made a sound unlike her previous vocalizations, higher, almost like laughter, but gentler. She shook her head in a distinctly human gesture of negation, then pointed eastward, deeper into the forest, before touching her chest over her heart. A new interpretation dawned on me. Not a shrine to the dead or disappeared, but a collection of offerings. Items willingly left behind by those who had been shown something so profound they had... what? Gone with them? Chosen to stay? The female approached me again, slowly extending her hand. Not to take anything this time, but in clear invitation. Her eyes held a question. A choice. I stood at a crossroads between worlds. Behind me lay my camp, my equipment, my deadline, my apartment in Portland, my career, my entire understanding of reality. Before me stood creatures that shouldn't exist, offering... What? I can't, I said finally, the words catching in my throat. I'm not ready. I have to go back. People are expecting me. The female lowered her hand, and though her expression remained unreadable to me, I sensed something like resignation, or perhaps patience. With surprising gentleness, she reached out and tapped my camera, then my temple, then made a circular motion with her finger that encompassed the clearing, the forest, herself, her companion. You want me to take pictures? To show, to tell? She nodded. A deliberate, human-like gesture that left no doubt about its meaning. I raised my camera slowly, giving them time to object or retreat. When neither moved, I began photographing. First the clearing with its arranged objects, then, with mounting amazement, the two beings themselves, who stood calmly, allowing themselves to be documented. When I lowered the camera, the female approached once more. She placed her massive hand gently against my chest, over my heart, holding it there for a moment. Then she stepped back and gestured toward the way we had come, releasing me, directing me back to my world. 3 months have passed since that October weekend. The magazine published my autumn foliage photos, which were well received but hardly revolutionary. The photographs of the Sasquatch remain on the secured hard drive, viewed only by me in private moments of wonder and doubt. The journal stays with me always, a reminder that there are mysteries still worth protecting. The stones sit on my windowsill, catching the light on rainy Portland afternoons. I've told no one the full story until now, sharing it here anonymously, without locations or identifiable details, because I believe some of you need to know they exist, that they are intelligent, that they have watched us for generations. But I also believe they deserve to remain largely undisturbed, encountered only by those they choose to reveal themselves to. Some nights, I wake suddenly from dreams of ancient forests and intelligent eyes watching from the shadows. And in those moments between sleeping and waking, I feel the weight of that invitation still open, still waiting. And that's my story. If you've stayed with me this long, I hope it gave you something to think about next time you're alone in the woods. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck might not be just your imagination after all. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below sharing your own unexplained wilderness encounters. I read every comment and respond to as many as I can. And don't forget to share this with anyone who loves a good mystery or who's ever felt that strange sensation of being watched among the trees. Who here has ever felt that sensation of being watched in the forest? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And what would you do if given the choice I faced? Would you have gone with them? Or would you have come back to tell the tale? Sweet dreams, everyone. Or should I say, pleasant nightmares. Now sleep, if you can ignore the whisper behind your curtains, or gain the courage to check behind them. Is that only wind, or a bloody creature waiting for you to respond?